Hello and welcome to the CX Files for February 20th, 2025. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan. I am actually Mark in Berlin, Germany, over for CCW Berlin, and enjoying all the trappings that Germany has to offer. I'm in one of my favorite cities in the world. Couldn't be happier to reconnect with so many friends and so many colleagues in the amazing elements of what is European CX.
That's fantastic. Well, Berlin is certainly a great place to visit. In fact, I'm planning a visit in July this year to bring my daughter over to see some of the sites. Obviously, it's a bit difficult trying to explain the Cold War to a 3-year-old, but certainly, you can never start too early with taking your kids to interesting places.
You said it, and I understand that the Uber drivers are exceptionally good there.
Well, yeah, listeners should know that Peter and I went with a couple of other friends for the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down back in 2019.
Yep.
And that was definitely an experience. Millions of people on the streets for that celebration, wasn't there? It was very difficult to find somewhere to go just to get away from the crowds.
It was very difficult to get away. The entire weekend kind of reminds me of the movie The Hangover, albeit I think we all maintained to keep our teeth. But it was a great time. Hard to believe that was coming up to 5.5 years ago. Looking forward to the 40th anniversary mark. But I'm really excited about this week's podcast because not only do you have somebody who I consider to be a tremendous thought leader and futurist in our space, but it's also a former coworker and a friend of mine.
That's excellent. Yeah, well, Ian Jacobs, who's the lead analyst at Opus Research in San Francisco. Now, Ian's only been at Opus for a few months now, I think since October or November. So he's joined them and he's heading up their AI practice, looking into things like natural language processing and the use of AI within BPOs, within CX companies. But a lot of us will know Ian from his comments online because he spent, I think, more than a decade at Forrester Research, and he published a lot of stuff that was very visible in the industry during his time at Forrester. Where were you working together then?
So we were at Data Monitor, which, as you'll remember, we morphed into Ovum, and Ian and I were working very closely on the CX practice. I was the one who was handling the CX BPO side of the things, CX outsourcing, or as we called it, CRM outsourcing back then. Ian was focused on the technology side, worked very closely, again, with another mutual friend of ours, Dan Hong. Certainly some wonderful memories. And I will say that, as I mentioned at the outset of introducing this podcast, Ian is truly one of the best in our business. And it's a real coup to be able to bring him on the CX Files.
Well, getting back to the interview, Ian, I really contacted Ian because of his new role and leading AI research for Opus. I think that what he had been publishing recently was some reality checks. Looking at the last couple of years, we've been talking about AI in CX. There's been a lot of noise, but he was certainly starting to publish about real uses, like real use cases, and companies that have really found this very useful. And I think that one of the big things that I talked with him about was the fact that we're not just talking about visible uses of AI anymore. So it's not just the chatbots for the customer or the agent having some sort of assistance, but it's everybody within the BPO company now having digital assistants. So everybody on the sales team, everybody preparing bids, everybody doing marketing, suddenly everybody has got these kind of digital assistants, and it's kind of changing the way that all of these companies are operating. So I think there's a more fundamental change going on, whereas our focus has traditionally been just on the stuff we can see, that kind of customer to brand interface. But there's a lot more inside the companies.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing your chat with Ian. Ian is one of the funniest people, I will tell you as well. He's got one of the driest senses of humor, and it's always a blast getting together with him. So let's go to your discussion with Ian Jacobs and find out a little bit more his views on some of these use cases as it pertains to AI.
Hi, Ian. It's great to catch up with you. Now, you recently moved to Opus Research. I think it was in October, so like the last quarter of 24. But you've been at Forrester for about the past decade. So clearly very visible in this space and publishing a lot of opinion and research on CX and BPOs and this environment generally. Maybe could you just introduce Opus Research and your area of focus now then?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Mark. I did join back in October, but I was also on the road for quite a bit of it and had vacation. So I feel like I'm really just getting in the swing of it, even though it's January. It's kind of amazing. So Opus research has been around for 3+ decades. And for all of that time, it's been focused on conversational technology. Now that's mostly conversational AI, generative AI, conversational intelligence. So where things like speech analytics, text analytics, interaction analytics, employee augmentation are all kind of merging together into one thing. And a bit on intelligent authentication. That's sort of the heritage as well. So the ID and V identification, verification, fraud, which is starting to also gain a lot of interest now that we're getting into a world of things like voice cloning and what happens to our old traditional my voice is my password when you could just, get a 11 Labs website demo to just copy my voice, right? It's getting a little scary there. Um, I personally am bringing a couple of new areas or new focuses to that research at Opus. I'm mainly interested in how all of this technology that I just talked about impacts actual human beings, be they customers or employees. And that technology that I mentioned, all the conversational kind of stuff and generative stuff, is going to pretty drastically transform the things that we think of as WEM, workforce engagement, workforce planning, quality, all the kind of operational tools inside of contact centers and BPOs, as well as obviously transform the BPO space itself, right? There's a reason they think this stuff is an existential threat. So those are two areas that are things that Opus has touched on, but more as use cases of those technologies. And now we're shifting at least my research focus to make that front and center with the technology being the driver for why we're looking at that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and like you say there about what's changing because there is a change sort of inside the contact center or inside the BPO. They're finding ways in which that they can use automation, drive out redundant tasks. But then we're also seeing it on the front line as well. Much smarter sort of interactions directly with customers. And I think that it's interesting because we've seen this. I mean, it's ever since Chat GPT was released. 23 was a sort of year of, the humans are finished inside customer service. 24 was kind of no. Now we understand that we do need a blend. But I'm interested to sort of find out. Have you seen this move beyond pilots and experiments? I mean, are there companies that you've seen sort of using this in a big way yet, or are we still kind of experimenting?
We're still experimenting writ large, but there are definite use cases where we're seeing massive adoption. The thing that I want to, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the thing that I want to point out is you mentioned ChatGPT and everybody's got Gen AI in the brain, right? We have this common urge to Gen AIfy everything, but there are still some things that just work better with deterministic solutions. Still, what we thought of as AI 4 years ago, pre-ChatGPT, there are voice solutions that we've been experiencing, at least in the US, for quite a long time, mostly driven by Nuance Voice IVR, but interactions and other vendors, where there are sort of known domains, known nomenclature, right? Known solutions, and the deterministic stuff works just fine, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper right now. So let's not get ahead of our skis in terms of Gen AI everything. That said, yeah, there are definitely some use cases where we're seeing pretty rapid adoption. One example is simply transcription and summarization, right? Inside a contact center. Agents were never all that accurate in putting in reason codes and right some of the ACW that the after-call work that they had to do. So let's take that off their plate. And even if we're only at like 90% accuracy, that's on par with human agents, maybe even a little bit better than human agents. And it frees them up to get back on the phone or get back on the next chat or whatever more quickly. And it allows you to give the raw material for agent augmentation tools, right? Once you start to transcribe things in real time, you can start to pop up suggestions, be they process maps for how to initiate service from your utility, or knowledge articles, or actual summarized answers from knowledge articles, all that kind of stuff. But for now, where it's really happening is that ACW stuff is like, why bother doing any of that with humans? We are also starting to see automated quality really become common, but I also need to define some terms there because the promise has been we're going to do like the same kind of QA that you've done on your 1% random sample of calls on 100% of calls across all agents. You could probably do 70% of that across all 100% of your agent population, which is an amazing win. It's just not as far ahead as the promise is yet. But again, it's just a huge win. And interestingly, you've probably heard this from others, especially inside BPOs. The thing that automated quality was supposed to be scary, or the reason it was supposed to be scary was like, oh no, the agents are going to fear that it's listening to every call. But the reality seems to be the exact inverse, which is there's now a notion of fairness where it seemed like the random sample method, like, oh, you got me on a bad day, or you got my 3 terrible calls that day, but all the other ones were amazing. Right. And that's out the window. And now agents are like, oh, okay, you're listening to all my calls, but you're also listening to all of Jose's calls and also all of Maria's calls. And okay, great. That sense of fairness. That's kind of the unintended benefits that I think we're going to see more and more of as we start to deploy these technologies. We do it for one thing, but we end up with all these other kind of interesting benefits. I know I'm being long-winded about this, but no, we're not seeing like massive deployments of the front end voice AI where you call in and 100% of your interactions are now handled by some voice bot or voice AI that's really generative, that didn't require a lot of training and coaching ahead of time and a lot of predetermined flows and workflows. It figures out the workflows. We're looking towards that stuff, but that is still a ways off.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that as well, because something I often say to people, talking about how are we going to build like a Gen AI interface for our customers, is like, well, what are you offering already for them? And I always give the example of my water company in Sao Paulo, and they use WhatsApp for business. And of course, it's just a deterministic system. They know what 90% of the customer questions are going to be, and they can send you through a decision tree. But it always works. I've never had the need to ever call them because everything I ever need from my water company is answered on WhatsApp. And I don't know what that costs, but I'm sure that that's a hell of a lot cheaper than training a large language model.
Yeah, I think about it as you are not lucky. You're normal. You are the normal customer. 80% of the interaction volume is like 3% of the potential use cases. But do you really want to build the AI for all those corner cases? Yeah, you're going to get it to 100%, but the cost is ridiculous to do that. Now, that's not true for all brands and all industries, right? This is definitely true for utilities and retail. There's all like the account management and Wizmo kind of like the known use cases. But once you get into public sector and healthcare, for example, where everybody's case is really truly individual. I know we all think we're special snowflakes, but we're not. But in those cases, we actually are. Financial services doesn't matter whether we're unique or not. It feels like it's my wealth on the line, right? So it really, really matters, and we want to be able to dig into every single nuance. In those cases, it is important, and financial services is one of the really early heavy investors in this stuff for exactly that reason. Sure, we all want to talk to a wealth manager if we were lucky enough to have enough wealth to do that. I look forward to that day. But, for now, if I'm stuck using an automated system, I want it to be better, to be able to really dig into the craziness of me now having a 86-year-old, soon to be 87-year-old father-in-law whose finances are now intermingled with mine, right? Like that kind of, sure, everybody has similar problems of my age, but they feel really, really unique to me, and it matters more. And that's, one of the things that we haven't talked about enough in the BPO world and in the enterprise world in general, which is what are the use cases where consumers really care? Like where deterministic automation is perfectly fine. Those where deeper AI automation, but with a very clear path to human backup, is also required. We've been thinking about it industry by industry, right? Healthcare and financial services, sure, you absolutely need humans to back things up, but not everything in those two industries. Account management is still account management. Change my address. I don't want to talk to anybody ever. I don't care whether it's deterministic or Gen AI. Like, I don't need to talk to anybody for that. If I chose to use the voice interface, I just want some quick, give me the new address, do a verification, feed it back to me. Yep, you got it right. Boom, I'm off, right? 3 seconds, the whole interaction is done. But again, when we start to talk about being the sandwich generation with parents on one side and kids on the other and trying to make the finances work, then I need something more hardcore. Then it's more like an experiential question and less like a technology question. What is the function that I'm trying to solve? And then give me the technology to fill it rather than, hey, I've got this new shiny generative technology. What can I do with it? Which is a lot of what we've been seeing. So we got to like flip the script on that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I was going to ask you about some of the sort of big name examples of companies that are doing a sort of front end customer interactions with AI. Last year we saw Klarna saying that they're doing about three-quarters of their customer interactions with AI, and Salesforce has their Agent Force system, and they claim that 83% of engagement with Salesforce is now handled automatically by their system. I mean, originally I was just going to ask you if these cases are becoming more common, but I guess from what you've just said, that either these are exaggerated claims or they are just early adopters that seem to be doing simple support very well.
So I'm going to be a little bit obstetrous here. And, let's look at Klarna. So maybe I'm going to overstate this for effect. But if Klarna's AI really slashed their resolution times from 11 minutes to 2 minutes, the real story might not be the brilliance of AI, but how inefficient their service was to begin with, right? Like, clearly they had some problem in their chat program that we can solve. We could, with the right BPO, the right operational expertise, people who really understand how to run chat at scale, we could have reduced that for less than the cost of building up the startup of, ramping up their AI. Now, I'm overstating it. Their AI assistant is impressive. It is. But cutting the average resolution time by 80% really suggests to me that they were leaving a lot of low-hanging fruit in the customer service world untouched before, right? So I think a lot of what we're seeing is that kind of stuff where, yes, it is huge, but we could have gotten three-quarters of the way there just through efficiencies in traditional customer service operations. Salesforce is somewhat of a different story. It's not all of the interactions, it's the customer service, the customer care in a complex B2B environment, right? So that it's not doing the pre-sales and qualification of leads and all of the other kind of interactions that Salesforce still does with customers and prospects. It's on the service side in particular. And there, I'm frankly a little bit more impressed because of the complexity of those. Now, what we said before on the consumer side is still true on the B2B side, though, where there are a lot of use cases that are repeated over and over and over again across clients. And those are the ones that you know are going to be easy to take out. But again, those were probably easy to take out in a more deterministic fashion too beforehand. So it's that uplift of like, okay, we're applying it to all these different use cases across every type of B2B customer support. Well, they only do B2B support, all of the customer support that we do. And we're doing so in a quasi-agentic way where the effort on the inward facing side, the people building these solutions, is greatly reduced. You just sort of tell it what you want it to do. You give it access to all of the data that you need it to have access to, and we're off to the races. Is that replicable? Well, there's the privacy issue for all of the data. Like, sure, for Salesforce, there are some things that are tough around integration with third-party systems, right? That's bespoke to me, bespoke to you, and maybe I want you to know how I built that integration, or maybe you built the integration for me and you already know all of that. But those are two different use cases. On the consumer side, it gets to be very different. If I'm going to stay at a Marriott hotel, but my checking in on time is dependent on my flight from United Airlines working and my ability to get an Uber from, the airport to the Marriott property, like there's no way that they have access to that data upstream to help them figure that out in any agentic way without having to ask for it, which kind of defeats the purpose, right? So, yes, I think we are starting to see more of those use cases. But again, I'm going to assert pretty strongly that a lot of the benefits that people are claiming are benefits we could have gotten through more traditional means, not even necessarily technological. Again, with Klarna, I think it's an operations problem that really accounted for handle times that were that long or resolution times that were that long.
Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking about what is holding people back from engaging with AI more. Is it the training cost? Is it the complexity? But I'm guessing that from what you're saying, that maybe there's a lot of steps in between that they haven't even taken in many cases.
I think that's true, but when we ask brands, the decision makers, the buyers, at least on the voice AI side, the top two things that they cite as blockers, as it were, for doing more are performance quality. It just doesn't work well enough, and integration to existing systems. The integration piece, I used my ecosystem around travel as an example. Like that stuff is difficult. Um, Even if you're doing healthcare, integration with like the one big system in North America, Epic, that has most of the electronic health records and whatever, it's a bear to get that thing to work, no matter who you are. And so those tend to be, from the buyer's point of view, the problems. But were I the person manning, the contact center manager, supervisor, VP of service role, yes, I think that your take on it is right. There's a lot of other steps, experiential steps that they should be looking at, operational steps that they should be looking at that they haven't really grappled with. Just an example. This is something I've been talking about for nigh on 10 years with this. And it's what I was talking about when I started to say what I'm doing to change what Opus Research is looking at. Let's think about just workforce planning in a large contact center. You know, you got 6,000 agents and you've got to plan out just a schedule for a week. I'm not even talking about long-term planning. We'll get to that too. And now I'm deploying some Gen AI solution. And the vendor is telling me it's going to get better over time. So what you're telling me is you're going to impact my resource requirement over time, but you can't tell me how much, how quickly, which skills I'm going to need less of, which shifts are going to map to the demand for those, right? Like you're breaking our whole notion of what workforce planning is unless you connect those two things together. Who's doing that? Like, show me the tech vendor that is bringing those two things together and saying, as we predictably improve our AI solutions, we're feeding that data back into a WFO tool so that you have accurate forecasts so that you're not overstaffed or understaffed for particular case types or whatever, right? Look, let's solve that. And then we can start to talk about these great benefits, right? That's how the BPO mind has to work as they're starting to build out this technology themselves. They're the ones who are going to recognize the operational impacts. But if you're some voice AI vendor, you know, you've got some degree in linguistics and computational linguistics from Cambridge or wherever, you may have never even been in a contact center and thought about how they actually operate, right? So that's actually one of the blockers from the operations point of view.
Yeah, that's something that I was also thinking about because you mentioned that some of the BPOs are looking at this as potentially an existential risk. You know, it completely changes their business model. And what you just said about workforce management, it looks at, well, the traditional heart of customer service has always been the contact center, and the heart of pricing for this was the FTE. So contact center would charge based on the number of people in that contact center working shifts. But then if you start saying 10, 20, 30% of engagement is being handled by software, then your FTE model sort of breaks down. I mean, are we looking at CX, the future of CX, becoming a software problem primarily, or will it remain something that the BPOs are going to lead on?
Well, I don't want to get into the trendy but annoying services as software conversation. Like, okay, it's cute, but I don't want to go there. What I think is going to happen is two things. One, let's start with the first thing. We're going to see new models emerge because I think it actually starts with the funding and capitalization of your BPO business. They're built on that butts and seats model. The whole financial structure, the way the funding operates is built on that. We need a completely different approach. It needs to look more like a software company. That doesn't mean that it is software. It means that it is a different model for how you plan on making money, where you're getting your funding from, what the returns expectations are from those funding sources. You know, look at a company, the recent startup in the space, Crescendo, right? They've got agents, they've got the operational expertise coming from the folks from Alorica that both started it and are partially funding it. They've got the tech expertise coming from a lot of former Genesis folks, mainly, but some others as well, bringing that together, but it was built from the ground up on a completely different funding model than Alorica was before it, right? It's part of the reason why it's a standalone company and not part of Alorica, because it wouldn't work with the way that Alorica's expectations work and so on. So that's a different model. There are the gig BPOs like Shift Off, right? Or the variants like Support Ninja that let brands choose their agents from a pool recruited and vetted by the BPO. That's not the typical BPO model either. So we're seeing people play around with the underlying financials first to figure out how to make these things possible and not fall prey to the 30% of my FTE just are going to disappear because they're going to be automated. And I now have to fight for that automation business with everyone from core AI to the CCAS provider that's actually powering the routing in my contact centers, right? Like, sure, we're seeing that. So that's trend one that I think will play out. New models, completely new models. The second is history is overtaking us. One of the things that I would have said 6 months ago was you look at the really big guys like TP. TP still has a very large moderation and related business that's not butts and seats agents, and that business was growing. Yeah, well, the election in the US kind of upended the notion of whether we even need that stuff to the degree we ever did, before. I didn't see that coming. There's going to be a lot of those sort of historic, or not historic, but the world, the externalities banging on our door. And so what I think that means is we're also going to see more notions of what makes us more resilient, right? Resiliency used to mean, oh, I need some new sighting experts who can help me figure out like where the next arbitrage opportunity is. Okay, we've tapped out all of the Philippines. Where are we going to next? And where's next? And where's next? There's still some of that resiliency, but it's more like where does human empathy sit? Where can people communicate that empathy? Because we are stuck in this world where automation exists and a lot of the simple things are going to be taken out of the equation. And we are not necessarily going to be just the L1 for brands anymore because there may not be any L1 agents. So if we're now L2 and L3 as our business model, how do we find the resiliency to say, okay, we've got these my health, my wealth questions that really deeply matter to people. How are we going to be the solution for brands around empathy rather than around low cost? Or maybe it's lower cost empathy. I don't know, whatever, however you want to think about it. But we also need to tweak or the BPOs need to tweak their notion of what resiliency means if they want to survive. You'll note I didn't say that the solution is you just got to out tech the tech companies. That's just, point to a single BPO that has really built a fully successful product house, other than maybe 24/7.ai, but they used the BPO to fund that product house forever, and they never even want to talk about the BPO. They pretend that it doesn't exist, right? Like, so, or didn't for years. I think they're changing their tune on that. Right? So
Yeah.
that model has never really worked. And
Mm.
there's certainly a lot of examples of the BPOs that have tried various different ways to make that work. I'm not saying that they can't build out their own technology. They can, they will.
Mm.
I think a lot of it is going to be to improve their own operational efficiency and rather than we're going to be the solution for the customer facing stuff. One exception. There is one exception, and I think this is something I don't remember when I was looking through your archives whether you touched on this recently or not, but real-time translation, that machine translation stuff. Meta just published a paper that talked about real-time in voice to voice from 100 languages to 35 or something like that. We're still a ways off, but solving the long tail problem of the customers, right? Serving Finnish customers out of where? Like, where are you going to serve them out of? You can build a language center of excellence and, hire 15 Finns to go live in Athens because it's pretty in their sun. It's not really scalable. But real-time translation solves that problem for BPOs and allows them to expand their addressable market quite a lot. So that is an area where I think they are investing in that technology, whether it's directly investing in building it or investing in partnerships with those that are building it. But that's an area where I think their technological expertise can completely upend their business model in a good way, like where they
Yeah.
can really completely change the way they do things.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned Alorica because it was Alorica that was on this podcast recently talking about this technology. So
Yeah.
there's an interesting match there. And I was thinking what you were saying there about the skills that are needed to deliver a solution now, and how we've always kind of gone to places because they're rich in resource. There's lots of skilled people available to work in BPO, and yet. Something I've said for a long time about South Africa is that we shouldn't, or the organizations like Vipesa that promote the industry down there, they shouldn't just promote it as being lower cost than markets like the UK. They should actually be talking a lot about the fact they've got a great IT industry there. You've got great technology resource in places like Cape Town that can feed into what the BPOs are doing. I don't know if they've kind of caught on to that yet, but to my mind, it sets them apart from other sort of BPO destinations.
Yeah, there are two parts to that. There's the agent pool, the talent pool for the CX delivery itself, right? And we know there's a reason there are a lot of contact centers in Las Vegas, hospitality industry, and Cape Town is the same thing. Like it's got a very large hospitality industry. So they could play up that side as well on the agent population. But you're right, there's also the operational and tech side. And who knows how to do the integration with my 5.9 system because I'm going to control the routing, right? Because I'm going to arbitrage my BPOs and I'm going to centrally control the routing and send traffic to whoever's performing best within my SLAs. So all the wonderful fun that BPOs need to go through in dealing with very large multinational corporations. But right, like who knows how to handle that? Who knows how to put out the fires the minute that they come so that we can, I just accidentally mentioned 5.9, but so that we can have 5.9 of uptime of our centers, right? Like that kind of stuff. So yeah, I agree with you. But I also think on the agent side, I mentioned empathy. I think empathy is partly the new currency here because, again, automation reduces the need for us to ever interact with human beings for the simple things. We're only talking to human beings for things where automation actively failed us, which means that as consumers, we might be frustrated because we actually tried to use your bloody bot and it sucked, right? Or those things where there's naturally a lot of empathy required because they're high stakes from the consumer's point of view. Again, my finances, my health, my citizenship, all those types of things. And how do we hire for empathy? It's a different kind of question because right now, empathy in contact centers tends to be, frankly, dictated to be performative. Here are the words that you use to unruffle the feathers of an annoyed customer, that kind of thing. That stuff's performative. But there are people who are naturally empathetic. Again, one of the reasons that hospitality hotspots tend to be contact center hotspots, because there are people who've learned how to deal with the public and choose that job. In most cases in the US anyway, you could go work at Walmart for about the same pay as your starting pay in some of the contact centers, especially with the minimum wage laws rising in places like Washington State and California and so on, right? So you're choosing this industry for a reason. Now, sure, savvy contact center people may have cited their contact center in some rural place where there ain't no other option for a job. Great, okay. But for the most part, right, in Las Vegas, there are plenty of other things that you could be doing. You're doing it for a reason. It fits in with your schedule for school, is one, sure. But another is you like helping people. You just like it. I mean, I think it's one of the things that gets lost in our rush to do like accent neutralization and oh, I can't stand dealing with these people in the Philippines. They chose that job because they like helping people. Like they're trying to help you. You're the one who's got more of the problem than they do here. Like work with them because they're trying to work with you. They're not getting frustrated with you. They're being incredibly patient with your frustration, right? Like that. How do we find that? That's the skills that I think on the talent side we need. But again, I think there are 1,000% on when you say like the the municipalities and countries that are trying to promote themselves need to go beyond the arbitrage benefits of moving to those places, or the vacation possibilities for the brands when they go and do their site visits. Which, hey, I was just in Cape Town myself on vacation, so I get it. Like,
Yeah.
okay, sure, I want to go there if I work for, whatever bank, and then that's where it's Standard Charter or whoever, and I'm going to offshore there. But beyond
Yeah.
that, yeah, we've got to think about new ways to position the BPO world beyond. I mean, you've talked about it. The FTE model is it's not broken, but it is fraying at the seams. We can see it coming apart. I mean, we
Mm.
can see that in the software world too, though. Like the whole license-based model is under pressure, and we're seeing more and more pressure for outcome-based models. That's something that BPOs have also tried forever and never been able to get brands to sign on for. Once you start paying for outcomes rather than consumption or seats in software, maybe the brands are more amenable to that on the labor side as well, right? So that's another way we can start to rethink the models. Just
Yeah.
an idea.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to remember that as well. I mean, that focus on empathy and changing the profile of the people, the humans that work in this industry, and remembering that a lot of the time they're doing this because they just enjoy helping people. Because so much of the discussion is around, how is Gen I changing the contact center, and how are we automating everything, and we kind of forget that there's still millions of people actually out there working, talking to customers every day. And even though their role is changing, in many ways, what the technology is doing is changing the role of the humans positively, and clearing out 30-40% of the simple questions so that they can focus on the more interesting conversations.
But it does mean that we need to start to think about different financial models. I mentioned a couple of different approaches to that, but another is if you've been hiring just for L1 agents to do account management, you might need to pay people more to do more empathetic work, but you're going to need fewer of them. So if your program brings in the same revenue, pay people more, have fewer of them, and your costs are a wash, and your program costs more, and so you've brought in more money that way. Like you can't just assume that it's always going to be, as low minimum wage as you can possibly get for people. You might need to pay more. We see that, for example, on the tech support side, right? Like we're seeing not anything new, but Central and Eastern Europe taking a lot of that business. That's a lower cost market, but it's not the lowest cost market for those things. Why? Because those people can actually do that work. Now, there we're talking about tech skills, but the same would be true for that empathy skill. We may need to pay more for that, and we may need to find sites where there is that culture that's more common. I'm not denigrating any culture or propping up any other culture, but there are some that are more naturally outgoing and some that are more reserved. You probably don't want to site your centers in the places that are even more reserved unless you're serving the local market, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe not. So we could think about costs in terms of geo that way as well. Okay. All right, where do we need to site? But it may not be the cheapest option. But again,
Mm.
if we're dealing with more complex use cases, we can charge more for that. So
Yeah.
we, there's still a business to be made there. I just
Mm.
don't know that the BPOs are all that, the traditional BPOs are super eager to jump into that right now. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, just to wrap up then, I mean, what do you see sort of coming down the track? What are you focused on over maybe the first half of the year? You certainly mentioned agentic a couple of times during the conversation, and I think that that's something that a lot of analysts are talking about for 25, And I think there may be one thing that's driving that is the upgrades we're seeing to Alexa and Siri, and all of these kind of digital assistants are now claiming that they're going to be agentic enabled. Do you think we'll see customers asking their digital assistant to go off and handle their customer service queries?
No, but, well, how do I say this greatly? Yes, but not those. Right? So let's think about where there's been money to be made for these. People call them agentic AI or personal agents. I think of them as proxies because they tend to have focused on specific use cases. So the brand Rocket Money, for example, will go and find all of your recurring subscriptions and then automate helping you cancel those. That's a very specific use case, and they make money from the money that you're saving. So it's really clear how that is a business model, much less clear for Siri, Alexa. That said, in the last 2 days, we saw Perplexity and OpenAI both announce some simple steps towards that agentic personal agent, only on the digital side. It's not voice yet. Um, I think the problem is we are going to see those personal agents where there is a clear business model for a brand to make money, and brands are not ready for those interactions yet, right? If you've been looking at this kind of technology regularly, LinkedIn's algorithm knows to feed you kind of the videos of my personal agent interacting with some brand's AI, and they just get into a loop, not because my agent isn't good, but because you're using some voice IVR and it does the um, all agents are busy, please continue to hold thing. And then my voice AI says, thank you, I will continue to hold, right? It responds because they just haven't built the systems to handle the human representative or human proxy on the consumer side. There was another use case that I thought was brilliant that cost a brand a good amount of money, which is the consumer wanted to cancel and had their proxy try and cancel, but the brand policy was that it required human authorization from the consumer. But the proxy didn't care. So it got hung up on and it called back and it didn't get through and get its task done. And it called back and it called back like 200 times. Now think about the cost of that one interaction for the brand because they have not caught up with it.
Mm,
So yes, we are going to start to see it again. I think there needs to be a core business model where some company is making money off of my consumer personal AI. And there are only a few of those today, but I think we're going to see a lot more of that. But the brands and the BPOs who are also helping on the operational expertise side are going to have to help the brands figure out how to deal with that. How do we change our policies? We can't just insist that a human being okays this cancellation. What does authentication look like when it's not me, but my personal proxy? Right? Like
yeah,
those things have not been worked out. So the technology may get there soon-ish. I think the process is going to take a really long time to work out. We just have not started to really think through all of these problems. What is the
mm,
standard for bot-to-bot interaction? Like, where is the equivalent of HTTP or some other agreed upon standard of what that bot-to-bot thing looks like? We don't even have that yet. So right now it's kind of Wild West. Like some bots have the ability to control a quasi mouse on some websites, but not
mm,
on others, right? Like,
yeah,
well, give me the standard where it can do those tasks on every website, and then it starts to become useful. Then I'm willing as a consumer to pay for it. Some brand can actually make money off of it, and therefore it will actually happen at scale.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I think agentic is coming, but I think we've got a lot of bumps in the road before we can figure out the agent to agent conversation, AI agent to AI agent side. And we still have to figure out the AI agent to human agent. Like what happens if I call a contact center that's being staffed by Foundever? Great, it's human to human. What happens if my voice agent proxy calls in, right? Like we see that now with the Google Duplex calling all the restaurants to check on the hours that they can feed back into Google Maps for accuracy, which I think they're still doing. Right?
Mm,
And they're still getting, Sal's Pizzeria, some guy picking up and dealing with this voice agent. What happens again at scale? There needs to be policy around that. We need to really build out the operational expertise before this tech is ever going to work. Like,
yeah.
but the tech is getting there. It is. Like, again, I would not discount the fact that Perplexity and OpenAI, like literally within the last week, have both announced new offerings in that space, right? And those are two really popular from the consumer point of view, just to play around with Gen AI. Great, let's see what it can do for making a dinner reservation for me next weekend, right? Okay, it's low risk. Why not try it? See how it goes.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
consumer acceptance will rise because of stuff like that. Brands just need to figure out how to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's that age old problem that the technology is there, but there's the acceptance of the users, there's regulation, there's all these
I
other
didn't
kind
even
of
get into regulation. You're right. Yeah.
yeah, there's all these other bumps in the road that you have to go through. I mean, it's very much like the problem of autonomous vehicles that you see that the technology kind of works, but once you go out into the real world and then start throwing every possible scenario at the cars, whenever there's an accident, the autonomous vehicle gets blamed, even though there's thousands of road traffic accidents with humans every day anyway.
Well, I live in San Francisco, and not only that, I live in the neighborhood where the parking lot is for Zoox, which is not the Google, but the Amazon funded
Mhm.
autonomous vehicle company. So they're all over my neighborhood all the time. So I'm living with the reality of where that works well, where it doesn't work well, what it can figure out, what it can't figure out. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a great place to stop then. I mean, that was a great overview. Thank you very much. I think we ran over, but I think because yeah, we just kept on talking about this
Oh
stuff, and
yeah.
it's the sort of thing where you could probably sit in a bar talking for hours about what's going on. But thanks very much for that, Ian.
Yep. Sorry to be your longest episode ever, but thanks for having me, Mark.
No, that's great. Thanks very much.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.
Yeah, Dan certainly is quite the shutterbug, but all I can say is that in our time in the CX space, we've run into a few shutterbugs. It seems to be a popular hobby.